Yeah, observing. So so strict, it's interesting. What's happening in the world today is there's the Orthodox community that has all its little variations in it. And then I would say there's the non-Orthodox community, which I would say in the next 20 years, maybe 30 years, will be one group. Because we have different movements. We have the conservative movement, the reform movement, the reconstructionist movement, and the reality is there aren't enough Jews and not enough money to keep those divisions a reality, and they're meshing. So the issue, for example, of GLBTQ community, the gay, lesbian, transgender, queer community, most of the non-Orthodox traditions have accepted and welcomed that community. Will do weddings for that community. So that is not a fault line between the movements that it once was. The issue of Hebrew, which once was a fault line between the different movements, the Reform movement has a lot of Hebrew, the conservative movement has a lot of Hebrew, that's not a fault line. Prayer isn't a fault line. The one fault line left is intermarriage. That is the one division that we don't seem to be able to bridge, although in reality, time will determine that, because 51% of the community is intermarried.
In the United States or worldwide?
It's kind of overall, but majority in the United States. This is, I think, the United States number. And so hopefully they choose Judaism to raise their children. That's the people Israel part. and if they do, they're going to be in our congregations. Now, I officiated interfaith marriage. We welcome interfaith families. And the families that are part of Temple make Judaism the primary religion of their children, but they also participate, of course, in their non-Jewish families' traditions and celebrations, and so that's sort of the reality that we have now. But I would say it's interesting, things are changing a bit where young couples, there are a couple of young couples who are wanting both a minister and a minister and a rabbi, or a priest and a rabbi coming together and co-officiating. You can't co-officiate because they're different traditions. However, you can co-bless. So Father O'Connell and I this summer are going to bless a couple who have a justice of the peace marrying them, and then we're going to both each do a blessing. So, you know, there's sort of the changes that happen. Because I think that has happened throughout Jewish history. Because if you look at after the Spanish Inquisition and Poland took the Jewish community, again, often because of certain restrictions, so religious people couldn't handle money in Eastern Europe at the time, 1492. And so but Jews always, money was a part of it. If you have a culture and a history and business, that's all under one umbrella. You don't compartmentalize. That's the compartmentalization that I was telling about. Religion isn't separate than everyday life. It's involved in everyday life. So Jews were brought by the government, the monarchy, against the church to be used as money handlers. We know that is something that's been used against Jews because they were literate. So it was during that time that Jews actually created promissory notes where they would go have people in different communities so they didn't have to travel with money because that was a sure way that you were going to be robbed. So they used notes and money in the community, and it was the Jewish community who was literate who could do that. And so literacy has always, and we did well under that, even though it was a restriction. We couldn't own land, and the church wouldn't let Christians handle money. So we were then, sometimes they didn't like the messenger. We were the messenger of the monarchy. But it got us far, and it got us a really lovely way of life for a while. So throughout every generation and every point in time, we do our best to do our best. Yeah, that's a really good question. I feel like we succeeded. although it's an ongoing conversation. We started a women's rabbinic network that was just at the seminary so that we would meet once a month. And what was interesting is now it's become kind of a broad organization that all women are a part of. So it's out of the seminary into the broader Reformed Jewish community for rabbis, so rabbis and congregations. So I feel good about that. That was a really good thing. We had to fight for that. We had to fight for that, but we did it, and now we have a place for younger women to come in and talk about, people don't usually talk about my male colleagues' shoes and hair. Now, granted, I probably, push this. Everyone talks about my shoes and my hair. So, like, what is that about? And it even got to the point where the cantor, who is far from, he was born 10 years before I was. He's in his mid-60s. He doesn't think about feminism. He never had to think about feminism. There weren't women in the seminary when he was there. And, it's just kind of interesting to sort of watch this. And he even sometimes, is like, are you kidding me? Like, she just worked on that sermon for weeks. And you're talking about her shoes, and that's all you're talking about. It's, so even the men around me who wouldn't naturally go there, sometimes they're like, just, you're kidding me, really. So that's even today. You mean taking his son? I think he did the right thing by not sacrificing his son, but taking his son. So yes, it's interesting. In Judaism, that story was always thought of as, we don't do child sacrifice. Everyone else around us in that period of time, some of them did do child sacrifice. It's a story to teach us we don't. That's not a Jewish thing. And in that way, then, I think the story has power. But if you look just at the relationship, you can see that Abraham traumatized his son. So if you read the whole story in Genesis, Abraham comes down the mountain by himself. It never says that Isaac came down with him. I think it's family trauma when things like that happen, and that parental power needs to be kept in check. And in that way, that story teaches us that as well. So if you look at that, he did the wrong thing, traumatize his child as a parent. And I don't know whether Abraham saw it, but you read the text and you can see that Isaac never, ever healed from that. Yes, I've given that sermon. When do we say no? We can be asked. So absolutely. The beauty of that text is that it is so nuanced and complicated that you can see that one year, and the next year you read it, you see another kind of nuance. So I would say absolutely. But there's also so much more to gain from it. Do we all know what happened? There was a shooting, and somebody went in. I was actually in Israel at the time that happened, so I heard about it later that day. And the really tragic piece is that both people who died were not Jewish. So it was an anti-Semitic act at a time where Jewish institutions are not seen only for Jews. That gunman was like fighting what we all work for. He wasn't just against Jews, but ultimately he was against pluralism, and he was against opening ourselves up to the other, and he was against the world as it is, thank God, which is much better than the world he would want, where everybody's in their place and you can identify and almost kind of ghettoize in the way that Jews were ghettoed, of people so that they can feel more powerful. I don't know if you know, but ghetto actually was first coined by the Jewish community in Italy, and so that's where that is. So that to me is sort of, if you look at 9/11, that's what happened in 9/11, is that the terrorists were fighting open democracy, is what they were really trying to destroy symbolically by the Twin Towers. And we all, thank goodness, stood up and said, no, unacceptable. We're not going to let that happen, and we're not going to let that move into fear. So I think it's a similar kind of thing that happened in Kansas City, is that this man wanted a world that had hatred and identifying groups, and we've moved so far from that in this country, thank God, that he was really attacking our basic values that we hold to be true. When we act out of fear, we are so small. Our reaction is so small. So I try my hardest to acknowledge the fear, to speak to the fear, but to not let it be the only thing that triggers a reaction. So it's always looking, acknowledging it, talking to it, speaking to it, bringing it forth, not letting, at the same time that the shooting happened, you have to remember there was actually it was a form of gossip that the Ukrainian government was asking for every Jew to write down their names so that they can identify them, which didn't happen, but it just kind of created the fear, again, of a world that's in pre-World War II, pre-Nazi Germany, and the community was very wound up by it all. So I think the fear needs to kind of step back, get spoken to, and then look at the facts, but the facts don't always help us because there was a shooting, people died, but it's to try and help us get a better handle on how we respond. Okay, so religion in general for me is meant to make sure that people do the right thing and care for each other. And that, to me, is the essence of religion. It's social justice. And I can give you the Jewish lens of that, but it's this tradition. We don't have the word charity in Judaism. Charity means love. That means you have to feel, or I have to feel love in order to give charity. In Judaism, tzedakah is the word, it's justice. And you don't get to feel like you want to work on justice. You don't get to feel like you want to do something that brings justice. It's a commandment to bring justice. And what does justice do? Justice helps us equalize and care for everyone. So if you don't give tzedakah according to Judaism, it's not even give tzedakah. If you don't leave tzedakah, then you are like a squatter on this earth. Giving tzedakah, leaving tzedakah is our rent to live on this earth. That to me is what religion's about. Religion gives us that clear message. It's about caring for each other. I have to go with Hillel. Love your neighbor as yourself. So what does that mean? First, you got to love yourself. Because if you hate yourself, you're going to treat your neighbor like not so nice. Right? If you don't really have self-love, then you're going to treat other people. That's what bullying's all about. We all know that. You guys have been steeped in bully stuff. The bully hates themselves. We know it. They feel small, so they treat other people small. Love your neighbor as you love yourself, means you got to love yourself. You got to see you're created in the divine image. We all have weaknesses. We're all bad at stuff. We all are great at lots of things. It's okay. It's okay to fail. It's okay. We're human. We're not perfect. Perfection is boring. For anyone who thinks they're perfect, you're boring. Who wants to be around you? Because if you're perfect, then what is everyone else? Ugh, yuck. Perfection is boring. It's really in the human frailty that we connect to other people, that we truly feel our place in this earth. Love your neighbor as yourself. You have to love yourself first, and then you'll be able to help and love other people. To me, that, I guess, is the most important concept. The idea that you as an individual can be a good person all on your own as an island is just not true. For putting it out there. Just not true. Judaism believes that you are, as I said on Monday, we all can be angels and we all can be horrible and mean. And we know it. How do you treat your siblings? Things come out of your mouth that you wouldn't say to anyone else. I say to my sister, I wouldn't be your friend. The only reason I still talk to you is because you're my sister. You're mean. You're obnoxious. I would never, ever take that from anyone else, but I take it from you. So we can all be mean, and we can all be wonderful. And Judaism says that we have both the good inclination and the evil inclination in us, and that we need to find the balance between the two. So to think that you could do it all on your own, it just isn't true. You think you can do it with other people? If you believe in human beings, I don't. I love human beings. I don't believe in human beings. Because if we can be both good and evil, depending on the situation, then how can I believe in human beings? It's just not enough. And so I think people at some point in their life realize that there might be something other. And for me, as I think I said on Monday, it's seeing people die and being in the midst of death that has made me realize there's something other. It's amazing what I have experienced that makes me say, there is something else. There is something unbelievable. Just reading this morning an article about a great-grandchild and grandchild, same person, but his great-grandfather and his grandmother were survivors of the Holocaust. And his great-grandfather wrote this memoir 2 years being in Auschwitz and Birkenau. And the most horrid, horrible, and destructive and traumatic experiences that one could ever be. He wrote a journal every day of his days and what happened. And he, on his deathbed, told the story to his daughter, who was also in Auschwitz, but he didn't tell her that he had written it down. She found it, and she actually translated it, but realized she only had half the manuscript. It stopped at like halfway through the first year. So she kept looking for the other half and the other half and the other half. The father dies. She takes the manuscript to the Holocaust Museum, and she thinks maybe they have the other half that she brought. Wasn't there. Finally, she's getting older, and her daughter's going to Israel. And so she wants to bring it to Yad Vashem, and she brings this box out that she had gone through thousands of times looking for the other half of this manuscript. And she looked in it one time and she saw it. It was wrapped in newspaper and it wasn't typed like the rest of the manuscript. It was still in handwritten form because her father had typed half of it, but not the other half. And for the first time, she saw this other half. And for her, after years of really thinking about it, she felt like that was like miraculous. Now, we might say it's coincidence, she opened her, whatever it is. She felt like it was God speaking to her. And she wasn't a religious person. But again, it's those moments that are very powerful that tell you there's something more. That's one small story. Okay.
Thanks so much.
Good. Thank you.
5-minute break. See you back here.